The old tavern on Zerion Prime was dark and smoky. Strange smells filled the air from dozens of different alien species drinking their troubles away. In the far corner sat a creature that made even the toughest aliens look away. Zek-Thorax was a Catherian warrior, but the scars covering his chitinous shell told a story of battles that had broken him. His forearms moved nervously as he lifted his drink. The amber liquid burned going down, but not as much as the memories that haunted him. His compound eyes swept the room constantly, watching for threats that existed only in his damaged mind. 3 years had passed since the war ended, but for Zek-Thorax it never stopped. A young female Catherian approached his table. Her shell was smooth and unmarked, showing she had never seen real combat. She carried a recording device and moved, with the confidence of someone who had never faced death. "Veteran Zek-Thorax?" she asked softly. "My name is Velandra. I work for the Galactic News Network. I would like to speak with you about the Terran War." Zek-Thorax looked up at her with eyes that had seen too much. "Go away, young one. Find someone else for your stories." "Please," she said, sitting down without permission. "The galaxy needs to know what really happened. The official reports say we won great victories, but the war ended in retreat. People want to understand why." Zek-Thorax laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You want to know why? You want to know about the humans?" He took another drink. "You think you are ready for the truth?" Velandra activated her recorder. "Tell me what you saw." Zek-Thorax stared into his drink for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and distant. "I was young then, like you. Proud of my strength, proud of my warrior heritage. The High Command told us we were going to conquer a new species. They showed us pictures of soft pink creatures with no armor, no claws, no natural weapons. They called them humans." He paused, remembering. "We laughed. Can you believe that? We actually laughed. These creatures looked so weak, so fragile. They lived on one small world, had barely begun to explore space. Our generals said it would be an easy victory, a chance for young warriors to earn glory without real danger." Velandra leaned forward. "But it was not easy?" "Easy?" Zek-Thorax's mandibles clicked together in what might have been a smile or a grimace. "Child, nothing about fighting humans is easy. Nothing about them makes sense. They do not follow the rules of war that every civilized species understands." He took another drink before continuing. "My first battle was on a world called New Haven. It was a small human colony, maybe 50,000 people. Our fleet of 200 ships surrounded the planet. We had them completely cut off. Any rational species would have surrendered immediately. But they did not surrender. They built walls. Everywhere, the entire planet became one giant fortress, but that was not the worst part. The worst part was how they fought." Zek-Thorax's eyes grew distant as the memories took hold. "I was part of the assault force that landed near their main city. The humans had built barriers everywhere, but we broke through their outer defenses easily. Our plasma weapons cut through their crude metal walls like they were made of paper." He paused, his hands beginning to shake slightly. "That is when I first met a human soldier. His name was Jake Rodriguez. I remember the name because it was painted on his armor. He was trapped in a bunker with maybe 10 other humans. We had them surrounded completely. There was no way out. What happened? In any normal war, they would have thrown down their weapons and begged for mercy. That is what civilized beings do when facing certain death. Instead, this Jake Rodriguez did something I had never seen before." Zek-Thorax set down his drink with a trembling hand. He looked right at me through the bunker window, made eye contact, then he smiled. He actually smiled, and then he pressed a button. Velandra waited, sensing the importance of this moment. He detonated his own ammunition supply. Blew up the entire bunker with himself and his soldiers still inside. The explosion was so powerful it took out 20 of my squad mates. The blast threw me 50 meters and left me partially deaf in one ear. He touched the side of his head where a deep scar ran from his eye to his jaw. But the physical damage was nothing compared to what it did to my mind. This human chose to die rather than surrender. More than that, he chose to take as many of us with him as possible. That seems extreme, Valandra said quietly. Extreme? That was just the beginning. After the bunker exploded, we thought the area was clear. We started to advance toward the city center. That is when the real nightmare began. Zekthorax's voice grew quieter. The humans had not retreated into the city like we expected. They were still there, hiding in the rubble we had created. As we moved forward, they attacked us from holes in the ground, from damaged buildings, from piles of debris. He gestured, with all 4 arms. They came at us with weapons that made no sense. Kitchen knives tied to metal poles, bottles filled with burning liquid. Some of them threw rocks. Rocks, but they threw them with such accuracy and force that they could crack our armor. How could primitive weapons hurt advanced soldiers? Because the humans using them were not fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like cornered animals protecting their young. I watched a human female, probably a shopkeeper or teacher, take down 3 Catherian warriors with nothing but a farming tool and pure determination. Zekthorax took another drink, his movements still shaky. But the worst part was their eyes. When you looked into a human's eyes during combat, you did not see fear. You did not see desperation, you saw absolute commitment. They had decided they were going to die and they were going to make it cost us everything. How did the battle end? It did not end. Not really. We took the city eventually, but at a cost no one had expected. For every human we killed, we lost 2 or 3 Catherians. Our casualty reports were so bad that Command thought we were lying. He leaned back in his chair. And that was just one small colony world. The humans had hundreds of worlds, billions of people. If every battle was going to be like New Haven, we would run out of soldiers before we conquered even a fraction of their territory. Valandra looked at her recorder to make sure it was still working. What happened to Jake Rodriguez, the soldier who destroyed the bunker? I found his body in the wreckage. He was burned beyond recognition, but he was still holding his weapon. Even in death, he looked ready to fight. Zekthorax's voice grew even quieter. Next to his body was a picture, a female human and 2 small children. His family, I assume. He died for his family? No, child. That is what I thought at first, too. But I was wrong. He did not die for his family. He died for the idea that his family should be free. Do you understand the difference? Valandra shook her head. Most species fight for territory, for resources, for survival. Humans fight for concepts, ideas, things you cannot touch or measure. Jake Rodriguez died for the idea that no one should be able to force him to surrender. That is not rational. That is not how war is supposed to work. Zekthorax finished his drink and signaled for another. That was my first lesson about humans. They do not fight wars the way civilized species do. They fight wars the way gods fight wars, with absolute commitment to principles that matter more to them than life itself. And that was just the beginning. That was just the first day of the first battle on the first world. I spent 3 more years fighting humans. Each battle taught me something new about how terrifying they could be. Each victory cost us more than we could afford. Each defeat showed us new ways that humans could turn impossible situations into weapons. He looked directly at Valandra. You want to know why the war ended in retreat? Because we realized we were not fighting a species, we were fighting an idea. And ideas, young one, are much harder to kill than flesh and blood. Valandra ordered another drink for the old warrior. She could see that telling these stories was painful for him, but she needed to hear more. The galaxy had to understand what really happened during the war. Zekthorax stared at his fresh drink for several minutes before speaking again. His compound eyes seemed to focus on something far away, something only he could see. The second story I will tell you happened on a world called Titan's Gate. It was supposed to be our great victory, the battle that would break human resistance forever. He laughed bitterly. Instead, it became our worst nightmare. What made this battle different? Titan's Gate was not a colony world like New Haven. It was a fortress world, designed specifically for defense. The humans had built it to protect one of their major trade routes. When we arrived with our fleet, we expected a difficult fight, but still a manageable one. Thorax took a small sip of his drink. Our intelligence reports said the planet had about 2 million humans on it. Half soldiers, half civilians supporting the military base. We brought 3 million Catherian warriors and the largest fleet ever assembled. The numbers were clearly in our favor. You outnumbered them? By more than 3 to 1. Any military strategist would tell you that such odds guarantee victory. We surrounded the planet completely. No ships could get in or out. No supplies could reach them. All we had to do was wait for them to starve. He paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. The human commander was a female named Lisa Parker. We intercepted some of her communications during the siege. She was young for a commander, maybe 30 human years. She had 2 children back on Earth that she talked about in her personal logs. What did she do? Something impossible. Something that defied every rule of military strategy ever written. Thorax's voice grew quieter. Instead of trying to hold the surface fortifications, she ordered her people underground. Not just the soldiers. Everyone, 2 million humans, disappeared into tunnels beneath the planet's surface. Velandra leaned forward. Tunnels? Miles and miles of tunnels. They had been digging them for years, apparently. Storage areas, living spaces, weapon manufacturing facilities, even farms. They had built an entire civilization under the ground where our sensors could not reach them. But surely you could have found the entrances. We tried. We found hundreds of entrances and sealed them. But for every one we sealed, they opened 3 more. They were digging new tunnels faster than we could close old ones. And worse, they started using the tunnels to attack us. Thorax's 4 arms began to gesture as he remembered. Human soldiers would appear behind our lines, attack our supply convoys, and vanish back underground before we could respond. They knew every tunnel, every passage, every hiding spot. We were fighting an enemy that could be anywhere at any time. How long did this continue? 8 months. 8 months of the most frustrating warfare I have ever experienced. We controlled the surface of the planet completely, but the humans controlled everything below, and they used that advantage to make our lives miserable. He took another drink. The worst part was not knowing where they would strike next. Our patrols would be walking along a road and suddenly the ground would open up beneath them. Human soldiers would pull our warriors down into the tunnels. We would hear screaming and weapons fire. But by the time reinforcements arrived, the tunnel entrance would be sealed again. What about your heavy weapons? Could you not collapse the tunnels? We tried everything. Plasma bombardment, seismic charges, even chemical weapons. Nothing worked. The humans had built their tunnel system too deep and too strong. When we collapsed, one section they just dug around it. When we flooded areas with poison gas, they sealed those sections and used different routes. Thorax's voice became strained. But the psychological warfare was worse than the physical attacks. They would leave messages for us. Graffiti painted on walls that said things like, "Welcome to hell," and "You picked the wrong species." They would play music from hidden speakers, human songs that talked about fighting and never giving up. Just psychological tricks? No. Much more than that. They started targeting our officers specifically. Somehow they had identified who was in command of each unit. Commanders would be walking with their squads when a human sniper would take them out from some hidden position. We never saw the shooters, never found their hiding spots. He gestured to a scar on his upper arm. I was a squad leader then. A human sniper put a bullet right through my shoulder from over a mile away. The shot was so precise it missed every vital organ but still put me out of action for weeks. They could have killed me easily, but they chose to wound me instead. Do you know why? Velandra shook her head. Because a wounded soldier requires more resources than a dead one. My squad had to carry me, get me medical treatment, protect me, while I healed. One precise shot turned me from an asset into a burden. That is the kind of tactical thinking that kept us awake at night. What finally ended the siege? Thorax's expression grew dark. Lisa Parker did something that still gives me nightmares. She contacted our fleet commander and offered to negotiate. Said she wanted to discuss surrender terms. Our commander was so relieved that he agreed immediately. She was ready to surrender? No. It was a trap, but not the kind you might think. Parker invited our commander down to the planet's surface for a face-to-face meeting. She said it would show her people that surrender was the honorable choice. Our commander brought a small escort and met her at the entrance to one of the tunnel systems. Zek-Thorax paused, his breathing becoming labored. Parker was there with just 2 guards, a school teacher named Paul Martinez and a maintenance worker named Betty Collins. 3 humans against 50 Cytherian elite warriors. They looked completely helpless. What happened? Parker activated a holographic display that showed the planet's geothermal system. Titan's Gate was built on top of massive underground heat sources that powered the entire world. She had rigged all of them with explosives. Valandra's eyes widened. She was going to destroy the planet? Not just destroy it. She was going to turn it into a miniature sun. The geothermal overload would have made the planet uninhabitable for any form of life. The explosion would have been visible from 3 star systems away. But that would have killed everyone, including the humans? Exactly. That was her point. She told our commander that humans would rather die free than live as slaves. She gave him exactly 1 hour to withdraw the entire fleet, or she would detonate the charges. Zek-Thorax's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Our commander thought she was bluffing. He told her that no rational being would commit suicide just to deny an enemy victory. Parker smiled at him and activated the first stage of the overload sequence. She actually started the process? The ground began to shake. Thermal readings spiked across the planet. Our sensors confirmed that the geothermal plants were beginning to overload exactly as she had described. She was not bluffing. This human, female, was actually going to kill everyone on the planet rather than surrender. What did your commander do? He ordered the fleet to withdraw. What else could he do? We could not conquer a dead world. And Parker made it clear that was the only kind of world we would get if we stayed. Zek-Thorax finished his drink. But the worst part came as we were leaving. Our sensors detected massive celebrations in the tunnel systems. The humans were cheering. They were celebrating the fact that they had been willing to die rather than submit. They were proud of their commander for being ready to kill them all. That seems insane. That is what we thought. But later, after the war ended, I learned something that made it even more disturbing. Lisa Parker had 2 young children back on Earth. She was willing to never see them again, willing to die in nuclear fire, rather than let her people be conquered. She chose death over slavery. She chose the idea of freedom over life itself. And her people supported that choice completely. Every single human on that planet was ready to die for an abstract concept that they could not even define properly. Zek-Thorax signaled for another drink. That was when I began to understand that we were not fighting a normal species. Normal beings value survival above all else. Humans value their principles more than their lives. How do you conquer an enemy that prefers death to defeat? What happened to Commander Parker? She survived. The humans developed a way to safely shut down the overload after we left. She continued commanding resistance forces for the rest of the war. But I never forgot that moment when she was willing to turn herself and 2 million of her people into nuclear fire rather than surrender. And this changed how you saw the war? It changed how I saw everything. If humans were willing to die for ideas, then no amount of military force would ever be enough to conquer them. You cannot kill an idea with plasma weapons. You cannot bomb a principle into submission. Zek-Thorax looked directly at Valandra. That was our second lesson about humans. They do not just fight with weapons and soldiers. They fight with their willingness to sacrifice everything for beliefs that cannot be touched or measured. And that makes them the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. The tavern was getting quieter as the night grew later. Most of the other aliens had left, heading home to families or back to their ships. Valandra noticed that Zek-Thorax seemed more comfortable now that they were almost alone. His 4 arms had stopped shaking, but his eyes still darted around the room constantly. The 3rd story is the hardest one for me to tell, he said quietly. It happened on a jungle world called Verdania. That is where I learned that humans are not just brave or determined. They are also the finest hunters in the galaxy. Hunters? Yes. But not the kind of hunters you might think. They do not hunt for food or sport. They hunt other hunters. They hunt soldiers like me who thought we were the apex predators of the galaxy. Zek'Thorax ordered another drink before continuing. Verdania was supposed to be a routine operation. The planet had no major cities, no important military bases, just small human settlements scattered through thick jungle. Command sent 3 battalions to clear the planet, 900 of our best warriors. That seems like a lot for a small planet. We thought so too. The intelligence reports said there were maybe 50,000 humans on the entire world. Most of them were scientists, farmers, and miners. We expected to finish the job in a few days. He took a long drink. The first sign that something was wrong came when we landed. Our drop pods were supposed to come down in a clearing near the largest settlement. Instead, we found ourselves scattered across 50 square miles of the thickest jungle any of us had ever seen. Scattered? How? Someone had sabotaged our navigation systems. Our pods came down in small groups of 5 or 10 soldiers each, separated by miles of jungle terrain. By the time we realized what had happened, we were already being hunted. Zek'Thorax's voice grew quieter. At first, we thought it was just bad luck. Equipment failures happen in war. We started moving through the jungle toward our rally points, expecting to regroup within a few hours. That is when we met the humans that the galaxy would come to call Rangers. Rangers? Human Special Forces soldiers. The finest warriors their species produces. On Verdania, there were only 7 of them. 7 humans against 900 Catherians. Any military computer would calculate the odds as impossible for the humans. But they won. They did not just win. They destroyed us so completely that only 43 Catherians made it off that planet alive. I was one of them, and I still do not understand how I survived. Zek'Thorax gestured to several scars on his arms and chest. The leader of the human rangers was a soldier named Danny Thompson. He had been on Verdania for 2 years before the war started, studying the jungle, learning every tree and stream and animal path. When we arrived, he knew that jungle better than we knew our own homeworlds. How could one human be so dangerous? Because he was not fighting alone. Thompson had 6 other rangers with him. Amy Foster was their sniper, the finest marksman I have ever encountered. Steve Johnson was their communications expert. Maria Santos handled explosives and demolitions. Carl Davis was their tracker. Pete Wilson was their medic and close combat specialist. Lucy Martin was their intelligence specialist. 7 humans against hundreds of your soldiers? 7 humans who had turned the entire jungle into a weapon. They did not fight us in open battle. They hunted us like animals, picking us off one by one, day after day, week after week. Zek'Thorax's compound eyes focused on something only he could see. The first attack came on our second day. My squad was moving through what looked like a normal game trail when the ground exploded beneath us. Maria Santos had buried explosives along the path and waited for us to walk into the trap. A simple ambush? Nothing about these humans was simple. The explosion was not meant to kill us all. It was meant to wound and scatter us. 3 of my squad mates were injured, not dead. The rest of us had to stop and help them, which made us sitting targets. What happened next? Amy Foster started shooting at us from somewhere in the canopy above. We never saw her, never found her position. She would fire 1 shot, wound 1 soldier, and vanish. We would spend hours searching for her while our wounded got worse and our supplies ran low. Zek'Thorax took another drink. But the worst part was the sounds. The humans would make noises in the jungle around us. Animal calls that were almost right but not quite. Branches breaking in the distance. Whispers that were just loud enough to hear but not loud enough to understand. Psychological warfare. More than that, they were driving us insane with fear. We knew they were out there, knew they were watching us, but we could never find them. Every shadow could hide a human soldier. Every sound could be the last thing we heard before they struck. How long did this continue? 2 weeks. 2 weeks of being hunted through that green hell. Every day we lost more soldiers. Not just to the Rangers, but to the jungle itself. The humans had taught the very environment to fight against us. Zek'Thorax's voice became strained. Steve Johnson had rigged motion sensors throughout the jungle. Anytime we moved, they knew exactly where we were. but the sensors were designed to ignore local wildlife, so the humans could move freely while we triggered alarms with every step. They turned your own technology against you? Worse, they turned our instincts against us. Cytherians are natural pack hunters, but we hunt in open terrain where we can see our enemies. In the jungle, our pack instincts made us predictable. The humans learned our movement patterns and used them to set traps. What kind of traps? Pete Wilson was a master of close combat. He would wait until our patrols were moving in standard formation, then attack the rear guard with silent weapons. By the time the rest of the squad realized what was happening, he would already be gone with one of our soldiers. Zek-Thorax paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. But sometimes he would not kill his target. Sometimes he would just wound them and leave them where we would find them. The wounded soldiers would tell us impossible stories about being captured by ghosts that melted into the jungle like smoke. Did you ever see these rangers directly? Once. My squad cornered Carl Davis near a river crossing. We thought we finally had one of them trapped. He was alone, outnumbered 10-1 with nowhere to run. What happened? He smiled at us, just like Jake Rodriguez had smiled before detonating his bunker. Then Davis dove into the river and disappeared. We searched for hours but never found a body. Later we realized he had swimming equipment hidden underwater. He had prepared for that exact situation. They planned for everything. Everything and more. Lucy Martin had studied our military tactics, our communication protocols, even our individual psychological profiles. She knew how we would react in different situations better than we did ourselves. Zek-Thorax's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The final battle happened at our extraction point. Command had ordered the surviving squads to gather at a clearing where transport ships could pick us up. We thought we were finally safe. But the Rangers were waiting. All 7 of them. They had turned our extraction point into a killing field. Danny Thompson had positioned his team in a perfect ambush formation around the clearing. When our transport ships arrived, the Rangers opened fire with weapons they had taken from our dead soldiers. They used your own weapons? Better than we did. Amy Foster shot down 2 of our aircraft with a Cytherian plasma rifle. Steve Johnson hacked our communication frequencies and gave false orders that sent our reinforcements into another trap. Maria Santos detonated explosives that she had hidden around the landing zone. How did you escape? Pete Wilson made a mistake. He tried to capture me alive instead of killing me outright. I managed to break free and reach one of the transport ships, but not before I saw something that still haunts my dreams. Zek-Thorax finished his drink in one gulp. The 7 Rangers were standing in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by the bodies of hundreds of Cytherian warriors. They were not celebrating or cheering. They were just calmly reloading their weapons and preparing for the next fight. They showed no emotion. That is what terrified me most. They had just defeated an enemy force 40 times their size, and they acted like it was just another day at work. To them, hunting down and killing trained soldiers was as natural as breathing. What happened to the Rangers? I never found out. The planet was declared off limits after our defeat. For all I know, they are still there, waiting for the next group of soldiers foolish enough to enter their jungle. Zek-Thorax looked directly at Velandra. That was our 3rd lesson about humans. They do not just fight with courage or determination. They fight with intelligence that can turn any environment into a weapon. They study their enemies so completely that they can predict our actions before we make them. And this changed your understanding of the war? It changed my understanding of humans. I realized they were not just brave or desperate. They were apex predators who had learned to hunt in packs, with a coordination that bordered on telepathic. And we were not their equals. We were their prey. The tavern was almost empty now. Velandra looked at her recording device to make sure it was still working. She needed to hear the rest of Zek-Thorax's story, but she was beginning to understand why the war had ended the way it did. There are more stories, Zek-Thorax said quietly. Worse stories. Are you sure you want to hear them? The night was growing very late, and Velandra could see that Zek-Thorax was struggling with the memories. His 4 arms trembled as he reached for another drink. This would be his 7th or 8th, but the alcohol seemed to have no effect on him. The pain was too deep for any drink to wash away. The 4th story is the one that ended the war, he said in a voice barely above a whisper. It is the story of what happened when we attacked Earth itself, the human homeworld. We thought if we could break their heart, we could finally break their spirit. You attacked their home planet? High Command was desperate. 3 years of war had cost us millions of soldiers and hundreds of worlds. Every battle was harder than the last. Every victory came at a price we could barely afford. The generals decided that only a direct assault on Earth could end the human resistance. Sek'Thorax stared into his drink. They assembled the largest invasion force in galactic history. 5 million Catherian warriors, 10,000 ships, weapons that could crack planets in half. We thought surely this would be enough to conquer one small world, but it was not enough. It was not even close to enough. What we found at Earth was not an army or a government or a military force. What we found was an entire species that had decided to fight to the last breath. He took a long drink before continuing. The space battle above Earth lasted for 6 days. The humans had ships commanded by officers like Captain Nicole Wright and Commander Greg Miller. When their weapons were destroyed, they rammed our vessels. When their engines failed, they used their ships as bombs. They used their ships as weapons. I watched a human destroyer with a crew of 300 ram straight into one of our battlecruisers. The human captain, a woman named Carol Thompson, broadcast a message on all frequencies before impact. She said, "Tell my children I died free." Then she detonated her ship's reactor and took out a vessel 10 times her size. Sek'Thorax's compound, eyes grew distant. But the real nightmare began when we reached the planet's surface. Every human city had been turned into a fortress. Every street was a trap. Every building was a weapon. The entire planet was militarized? Worse than that. The entire population was militarized. Children as young as 12 were fighting alongside soldiers with 50 years of experience. Grandparents were building bombs in their kitchens. Teachers were coordinating resistance movements from school buildings. Children were fighting. I saw a group of teenagers led by a girl named Karen Davis hold off an entire Catherian battalion for 3 days. They had turned their school into a communications center that coordinated attacks across half the continent. When we finally broke through their defenses, we found that Karen was only 16 years old. Sek'Thorax's voice became strained. But age did not matter to these humans. I watched an old man named Frank Cooper defend a subway entrance for 6 hours. He was maybe 70 years old, walking with a cane, but he had rigged the tunnel with mining explosives and held off 50 of our best warriors. How could an old man fight trained soldiers? Because he was not fighting for conquest or glory. He was fighting to protect the families hiding in the subway tunnels behind him. When we finally killed him, we found pictures in his pockets. Children and grandchildren that he would never see again because he chose to die defending them. The humans fought for their families. They fought for more than families. They fought for the idea that their world should remain free. I saw things that still give me nightmares. A nurse named Linda Hayes barricaded herself in a hospital with wounded civilians. She held us off for 3 days using surgical tools as weapons and medical knowledge to cause maximum damage. Sek'Thorax paused, his breathing becoming labored. Linda Hayes was not a soldier. She was a healer, someone trained to save lives. But when we threatened her patients, she became one of the most dangerous fighters I ever faced. She knew exactly where to strike to disable our armor, exactly how to use medical equipment as weapons. What happened to her? We killed her eventually, but not before she had wounded or killed 30 of our soldiers. When we searched the hospital afterward, we found that she had saved over 200 human civilians. She died protecting people she had never met before, people who were not even her own family. The entire population fought like this. Every human we encountered was ready to die rather than surrender. In one city, we cornered a group of civilians in an apartment building. Among them was a pediatric surgeon named Kelly Adams. We offered them safe passage if they surrendered peacefully. Did they accept? Kelly Adams answered for the group. She said they would rather die as free humans than live as alien slaves. Then she triggered explosives that brought down the entire building. She killed herself and 50 other civilians rather than accept our mercy. Thorax finished his drink and immediately ordered another. But the worst part was not their willingness to die. The worst part was how they coordinated their resistance. Somehow every human on the planet seemed to know what every other human was doing. They had good communications? Better than good. They had something we had never encountered before. When one resistant cell was destroyed, 3 more would appear to take its place. When we cut their communication lines, they found new ways to share information. When we captured their leaders, new leaders emerged from the civilian population. How was this possible? Because every human was a potential leader. Every civilian was a potential soldier. Every child was a potential coordinator. They did not need a command structure because they all shared the same purpose. They all wanted the same thing, and they were all willing to die for it. Thorax's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I remember one battle in particular. We had surrounded a residential area where maybe 10,000 humans lived, families with children, old people, shopkeepers, and teachers. We expected them to surrender immediately. But they did not. They turned their neighborhood into a maze of death traps. Every house was rigged with explosives. Every street had hidden weapons. Every family fought like a military unit that had trained together for years. How could civilians fight so effectively? Because they were not really civilians anymore. The moment we invaded their world, every human became a soldier. A grandmother named Mary Johnson taught her grandchildren how to make bombs from household chemicals. A school principal named Robert Davis used his knowledge of the neighborhood to coordinate sniper attacks. Children were making weapons? Children, parents, grandparents, everyone. I watched a 10-year-old boy named Tommy Wilson guide our patrol into an ambush that his family had prepared. When we realized what had happened, the boy smiled at us and said, "Welcome to Earth," right before his father detonated explosives that killed half my squad. Thorax's forearms began to shake again. But the breaking point came when we encountered a group of human scientists led by a man named Dr. Andrew Clark. They had barricaded themselves in a research facility with weapons that we did not understand. What kind of weapons? Experimental. Devices that could destroy all life on the planet. Not just human life, all life. They had created bombs that would turn Earth into a dead rock floating in space. And they were ready to use them. They would destroy their own world? Dr. Clark contacted our fleet commander and gave him an ultimatum. Withdraw from Earth immediately, or everyone dies together. He showed us readings from the weapons, proof that they could do exactly what they claimed. Was he bluffing? Our scientists analyzed the data and confirmed that the weapons were real. These humans had built devices that could sterilize their entire planet, and they were prepared to use them rather than accept conquest. Thorax looked directly at Velandra. Can you imagine that? An entire species willing to commit suicide rather than submit to foreign rule? They loved their freedom more than they loved their lives, more than they loved their children, more than they loved their world itself. What did your commander do? He ordered the fleet to withdraw. What choice did he have? We could not conquer a dead planet. And the humans made it clear that death was their final answer to conquest. So the invasion failed. The invasion did more than fail. It showed the entire galaxy that humans cannot be conquered by any amount of military force. You cannot defeat an enemy that prefers death to defeat. You cannot occupy a world where every civilian is willing to become a suicide bomber. Thorax finished his drink and stared at the empty glass. That was our 4th lesson about humans. When cornered, when their backs are against the wall, when facing complete destruction, they do not break. They become more dangerous than any weapon ever built. And this ended the war? This ended any hope of victory. How do you conquer a species that will destroy themselves rather than submit? How do you rule people who value ideas more than existence itself? The old warrior looked exhausted, but Velandra could see there was still one more story he needed to tell. The hardest story of all. There is one more thing you need to hear, Thorax said quietly. The real reason the war ended. The reason that will change how the galaxy sees humans forever. The tavern was nearly empty now. Only Velandra and Thorax remained, sitting in the dim light of the corner booth. The old warrior looked exhausted, as if telling these stories had drained something vital from him. But his compound eyes were clear, focused on something important he still needed to say. "The fifth story is not about a battle," he said quietly. "It is about why the war really ended, and it is the most frightening story of all." Velandra checked her recording device one more time. She sensed this would be the most important part of everything she had heard tonight. "Everyone thinks the war ended because we could not defeat the humans militarily. That is only partly true. The real reason the war ended was because my own people began to refuse orders." "Your soldiers stopped fighting?" "Not exactly. They stopped wanting to fight. After Earth, after seeing what humans were willing to do for their freedom, something changed in the Catherian military. Soldiers started asking questions that had never been asked before. Zekthorax ordered one final drink. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if he was gathering strength for this last revelation. It started with small things. Soldiers hesitating before attacks, officers questioning orders from command, veterans like me talking quietly about what we had seen humans do for their beliefs. What kind of questions were they asking? Questions like, what are we fighting for? And why do we want to conquer people who would rather die than submit? Questions that military commanders do not want their soldiers to think about. But surely your soldiers understood they were fighting for the empire. That was the problem. We began to realize that fighting for an empire is not the same as fighting for an idea. Humans fought for concepts like freedom and family and home. We fought because we were ordered to fight. The difference became impossible to ignore. Zekthorax took a long drink. The breaking point came when I met a captured human pilot named Captain Rick Davis. He had been shot down during the final assault on Earth and was being held in our prison ship. What was special about this pilot? Nothing on the surface. He was just an ordinary human male, maybe 40 years old. He had been flying supply runs to help evacuate civilian populations. Not even a combat pilot, just someone trying to save lives. But something about him affected you? Everything about him affected me. When I first saw him in his cell, he was not cowering or begging for mercy like most prisoners do. He was sitting calmly, looking at pictures he kept in his pocket. Pictures? Pictures of his family, his wife Karen, his daughter Lucy, who was learning to walk, his son Mark, who had just started school. He talked about them constantly, but not in a sad way. He talked about them like they were the most important things in the universe. Zekthorax's voice grew softer. I was assigned to interrogate him, to learn about human defensive positions. But instead of asking him about military secrets, I found myself asking him about his family, about why those pictures mattered so much to him. What did he tell you? He told me about the morning his daughter took her first steps, how his wife laughed when she burned breakfast because she was too excited about a promotion at work, how his son had drawn a picture of their family and put it on the refrigerator. These seem like ordinary things. That is exactly what I thought. But Rick Davis talked about these ordinary moments like they were sacred, like they were worth dying for. When I asked him why he risked his life flying supply missions, he said it was so other families could have moments like that too. Zekthorax paused, staring into his drink. I began to understand something that terrified me more than any weapon. This human was not afraid to die because he had something worth dying for. Not glory or conquest or power. Just the idea that families should be free to have ordinary moments together. This changed how you saw the war. This changed how I saw everything. I realized that humans did not fight like other species because they were not fighting for the same reasons as other species. Every other race in the galaxy fights for territory, or resources or dominance. Humans fight for the right to exist on their own terms. What happened to Captain Davis? Command ordered his execution, standard procedure for captured enemy combatants. But when the time came, I found that I could not pull the trigger. You refused to kill him? I could not stop thinking about his daughter learning to walk, about his wife burning breakfast, about his son's drawing on the refrigerator. I could not kill someone who fought for such simple, beautiful things. Zekthorax's forearms began to tremble again. But it was more than that. I began to wonder what I was fighting for. What did the Catherian Empire offer that was worth destroying families like Rick Davis's? What glory was worth taking away a little girl's father? Did other soldiers feel the same way? More and more of them, yes. Word spread through the fleet about the human pilot who carried pictures of his family. Soldiers started asking to see him, to hear him talk about his children, and every conversation made it harder for us to see humans as enemies. Why was this so powerful? Because we began to understand that humans were not fighting us. They were fighting for something. There's a difference that changes everything about war. Zek-Thorax took another drink. The final moment came when Rick Davis was scheduled for execution. The entire crew knew about it. As I was escorting him to the execution chamber, he asked me about my own family. You had a family? I had a mate and 3 offspring back on the homeworld. I had not thought about them much during the war. Military duty came first. Family was secondary. But when Rick Davis asked about them, I found myself talking about my youngest offspring's first molt, about my mate singing, about simple moments I had forgotten I treasured. What did he say? He said that my family sounded wonderful, and that he hoped the war would end soon so I could go home to them. Here was a human facing execution, and he was worried about my family reunion. That affected you? It destroyed me. I realized that this human cared more about my family than I did. He valued things that I had learned to ignore in pursuit of military glory. He made me see that I had been fighting to destroy the very things that made life worth living. What did you do? I helped him escape. I disabled the security systems and gave him access to a shuttle. He made it back to Earth, safely. You committed treason? I committed an act of sanity in an insane war, and I was not the only one. Across the fleet, soldiers were refusing orders, helping human prisoners escape, questioning the entire purpose of the conflict. Zek-Thorax looked directly at Valandra. Within a week of Rick Davis's escape, half the Catherian military was in open revolt, not because we supported the humans, but because we could no longer support destroying them. The military rebellion ended the war? The military rebellion ended the war because it exposed the truth that command could not face. Humans had not just defeated our armies. They had converted our soldiers to their way of thinking without firing a shot. How did they do that? By showing us what they were fighting for. Once we understood that humans fought for love instead of hate, for creation instead of destruction, for family instead of empire, we could not bring ourselves to destroy them. Zek-Thorax finished his final drink. High Command declared victory and withdrew the fleet, but every soldier knew the truth. We had not conquered the humans. They had conquered us, not with weapons or tactics, but with ideas that were stronger than any military force. And this is why humans are feared across the galaxy. Humans are not feared. They are respected, which is far more dangerous. Fear fades when the threat is gone. Respect lasts forever, and it spreads. What do you mean? Every species that has encountered humans in peace has learned the same lesson we learned in war. Humans do not just fight for survival. They fight for principles that make life worth living, and those principles are contagious. Contagious? Other species are beginning to ask the same questions that destroyed our military. What are we living for? What makes existence meaningful? What is worth dying for besides mere survival? Zek-Thorax stood slowly, his scarred form casting long shadows in the dim light. The galaxy will never be the same because of humans. They have introduced ideas that cannot be uninvented, concepts that cannot be forgotten. What kind of concepts? The idea that freedom is more valuable than safety, that dignity matters more than comfort, that some things are worth sacrificing everything to protect. These ideas spread from world to world, from species to species. And this threatens the established order? It destroys the established order. Empires are built on the belief that survival is the highest good. Humans have proven that some things are more important than survival. Once people believe that, empires become impossible to maintain. Valandra looked at her recording device, overwhelmed by everything she had heard. What happens now? Now the galaxy learns to live with a species that cannot be conquered, cannot be intimidated, and cannot be forced to compromise their core beliefs. Humans have earned their place among the stars not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through the strength of their convictions. Thorax moved toward the exit, then paused. Remember this, young journalist. The war between Catherians and humans ended 3 years ago. But the real war, the war of ideas, has just begun. And in that war, humans have already won.